Alright, hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Laura and here on my channel I talk about mental health, minimalism and our little family's journey of trying to have a baby. So today I want to give you a quick rundown of where I'm at kind of with my mental health and then give kind of an update and a bit more nuance and talk a little bit more about when we have multiple things going on, or maybe when one thing is actually hiding another thing, and getting into anxiety, ADHD and all of the fun stuff associated with getting diagnosed, what that means, finding other people who are in similar situations that you can talk to, and where I'm at with all of that. So please stick around. We try and just have like light enough discussions that get into important things, important little tidbits here and there, but mostly just around kind of being here with someone else who maybe gets what you're going through. So let's get into it. Alrighty, so a little bit of background. I have always been someone who is fairly anxious and fairly highly strung, and in my next video that I'm going to do on like figuring out what you actually want as a recovering people pleaser, I'm going to get into a bit more of the reasons why I was almost coached into being an anxious person in my early life. But anyway, it is what it is. I started going to therapy for anxiety generally a few years ago, and then almost 2 years ago, 18 months ago, I got an official diagnosis of a generalized anxiety disorder, and I started on anxiety medication for that. I'd already done a lot of talk therapy that had really helped with certain things, but I was still struggling so much to not feel anxious in my day-to-day life, and I was still being thrown so much by all of the like crushing feelings in here whenever anything little or big did show up, that I really wanted help to be able to not experience everything in such a heavy, difficult way. And so I found that the meds really helped with that, and I carried on with talk therapy at sort of different intervals, and that was going quite well. Around that time I started seeing a lot more media around ADHD, and at the time I kind of saw things that I thought maybe applied to me, but as I'm sure a lot of us know, in the media and in pop culture generally, ADHD is sort of caricatured as like young boys who are just throwing things everywhere because they can't control their impulses and can't focus on anything and get really mad and frustrated about it. That's kind of how ADHD was like prescribed in my brain as to what it looked like for me. And so I really I didn't have that as a kid, but I was also a kid who was really trying to be on their best behavior all of the time. And so in the last couple of years, after first of all just being like, no, let's just deal with the anxiety, let's come back around to it, I had some slightly difficult realizations that then brought me back to this ADHD piece, so we'll get there. But kind of what was happening was that I was feeling less like functional, less able to do things, and it was feeling frustrating because not that you should be super functional, super able to do things, like capitalism sucks, we get that, but it kind of felt like I'd done a lot of this work and then I was almost less functional at the end of it, but that was for a really good reason. But this then gave me a really interesting question. So the really good reason was that I was no longer willing to put myself into this extremely anxious state as a way to motivate myself to do things. And earlier in life, I'd been very willing, really, to tell myself things that would make me extremely anxious about getting stuff done, to then sort of hypercharge myself to get the things done. And so it becomes this very like negative based motivator. And to be honest, it was quite useful in a lot of ways. It just didn't leave me feeling very good at the end of it, obviously, because it was just a case of congratulations, you avoided being a total screw up. On the outside it looks like I've done a really good job, but on the inside I feel like I'm still terrible, right? So we can kind of see why that's not a good thing, right? The issue was that when I took that away, I then felt generally a lot less motivated to get things done. It actually became harder to do things. It wasn't like I took away this kind of negative based motivator and then all of this positive motivation kind of came in. it didn't really happen that way. And so I was actually then finding it harder to focus, harder to get things done, harder to kind of be doing the regular like 9 to 5 patterns and all of that. It just didn't seem to work for my brain. And I was not like emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically willing to go back into those old habits of motivation. But then I felt like I was now actually less functional and I was doing less well in the outside world after healing these things. And so that disparity, that was really difficult. It felt like I had done all of this really good work, but now I was almost feeling worse. Obviously a lot better in some ways, but then worse in other ways. And it kind of felt like this thing that doesn't match up. And I suppose if we think about it logically, like if we think that there's an issue and we go, okay, so if I solve that issue, then all of these things are going to get better. You solve that issue, not that I've like been cured of anxiety, but you solve that issue, you deal with a lot of the anxiety, right? And then some things get better, cool, and some things get worse. We'd then go, okay, so maybe that wasn't the thing, or maybe that was part of the thing is actually something else that's maybe slightly contrary to this. And that was kind of what led me to the ADHD thing. Around this time in the last sort of year or so, I've come across or realized I've had or made more friends who are neurodivergent. And it may be because I am masking less, I'm less trying to just fit into this little 9 to 5 neurotypical box, that I'm kind of allowing myself to just be a bit more open, a bit more out there, a bit more kind of doing the things that feel natural for my brain. And so I've made more of those friends. And like, obviously just chatting with people and someone saying, oh, I think you have this thing. Like people can't just go around diagnosing people randomly, right? But self-diagnosis, if done in a responsible, well thought out way, can be very valid. And so in talking with different people in my family and people around me, it seems that I do have a lot of these traits that are associated with people who I'm around who do have ADHD. So that's all I'm going to say there, is that for me and myself, I feel pretty certain of this thing now. Now, unfortunately in New Zealand, I don't know if this is the case in other places, but in New Zealand, for you to be given a diagnosis of ADHD and to be able to be prescribed medication to help with it, which I think is something that I'd like to try. I don't know if it's going to work for me because I haven't tried it. I'd have to try it to see if it works for me, but I'd like to have that option. In order to have that option, you have to be given a formal ADHD diagnosis by a psychiatrist here in New Zealand. They use the DSM, the Diagnostic Standard Manual, I think is what it stands for. I will write it down here if it's not, which is also what's used in the States in order to diagnose. It's not necessarily considered the best sort of standard for diagnosis in the world, but it is the one that we use. So it is what it is. But yeah, to receive medication, you have to have that formal diagnosis from a psychiatrist. And obviously certain psychiatrists have certain areas of expertise, like Plenty would be experienced with kids with ADHD, but not with adults who've gone for decades without knowing that they have it and are now coming back around and saying, oh yeah, this is kind of how I think I was as a kid, and this is also how I am now, and this is how I've coped with things for 30 years or whatever, you know? So diagnosing ADHD in adults is its own special field. So what I did was I went on Reddit for like ADHD people in New Zealand to try and get an understanding of what options and what people there were out there who are specialized in giving adult ADHD diagnoses and are not just going to say, oh, this is just a quirk, or you've made it this far in life, so like you're fine, or it's not possible that you've gone to the level of job that you have right now with ADHD, whatever. So people who really understand it, and I think also especially people who understand how much like feminine people are good at hiding what's really going on under the surface to just try and keep the peace and make things work for people. Like as women, as female presenting people, we are really good at that. And I definitely think that that was a big aspect, is that I just wanted to be the good girl. I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't want to cause a fuss. I was terrified of being seen to be bad or not good or not paying attention or not focusing or not sticking within the rules, all of that. So it's a little bit tricky. It is a little bit tricky, I will admit that. And that's kind of where I'm at a little bit, is that to get a formal diagnosis under the DSM-5, you have to have had symptoms before the age of 12. And I think I'm going to have to do a bit of digging in my family and maybe find some good like questionnaires around, you know, as an adult observing a kid, did they do this as a child? And that would be an indicator of ADHD, because I personally can't really remember very much from my childhood. And that then makes it hard to go to a doctor who legally and ethically and within their code cannot give you a diagnosis if you can't show that you had symptoms of this before the age of 12. And the symptoms thing is really tricky for me, because I'm like, I was a terrified, anxious little kid. I hid so much of what was going on inside me. So like, no, I wouldn't have gotten in trouble and been sent to the principal's office for XYZ, because I would have been really, really good at holding in whatever was actually going on in my brain, which is exhausting and really upsetting and really difficult and doesn't lead to a fulfilling life where you're actually being true to yourself, right? You know, it might get you by in childhood, and it did, and that's fine. That's like morally neutral. But for right now, it becomes difficult to describe. So I'm going to have to work with that a little bit and try and get a little bit creative to help people who were around me as a kid to maybe describe some things that they were able to observe. So yeah, again, very much not trying to game the system, but just trying to look at it from a different perspective to go, I don't remember doing these things, feeling these things, but I was kind of in fight or flight or fawn mode, mostly fawn mode, a lot of my childhood. So it's a bit hard to look at that objectively. Anyway, I think you get the point. So, as is probably the case in a lot of countries, psychiatrists are fairly in demand, and there is not nearly enough of them. So I first went to see my doctor about this late last year, and they had a bit of a screw up with my referral. It was someone has definitely sent it and someone has definitely not received it, and all of the details are exactly correct, but they can't confirm it over here and actually book my appointment. So what was hopefully meant to be a July appointment is actually a September appointment. So that's approximately 10 months after I booked, which is upsetting and frustrating, but it could be worse. And this is also why I really wanted to try get a psychiatrist that has experience diagnosing adults with ADHD, because I really did not want to like waste even 6 months waiting to get an appointment with someone who then says like, no, this isn't ADHD, what are you on about? You're fine, go away. And then I have to start all over again and go on to a new waitlist for someone else to get a second opinion and all of this. So fingers crossed for September. I am also sitting on the cancellations list, so if they do have anyone cancel before that, then I may get to go sooner. So like, again, fingers crossed on that. Where I'm at now though is like, if I'm thinking about sort of the self-diagnosis piece, it's really not this like victim mentality thing that I think a lot of particularly older age groups can feel like, is like, oh, the younger generations just want to label for stuff so they can say that they're a victim of it and that's why they can't do anything. Very much not that. What I think it actually is for me, and I think probably a lot of really like highly motivated people who are just really struggling with what's going on in here, is when you have a label to put to something, it can take away so much time and effort that you spend trying to figure out why on earth you're thinking like this, or why on earth you're struggling like this, or why did you say that, why did you do that. Instead, it helps us to easily go, okay, I'm struggling with that because of an ADHD thing. What I need to do is, go away, do this, and then come back to it. Or go away and think about this other thing and then come back to it, or whatever it happens to be. But it just saves so much time and energy and like shame of going, why can't I just do this? With this person just do this, why can't I just do that? You can actually work around it a lot easier. And you can also learn from other people who deal with similar symptoms to you, with things that work for them, and then go, okay, let me try that, let me see if that works for me. So it's really not a victimizing thing, it's a lot more of an empowering thing, where it gives you better tools to know what's likely to work for me, what's likely not to work for me. And let me tell you, a lot of the standard like motivation, productivity, getting things done, being successful advice is like opposite for neurodivergent people. And that is a mind F. That is so frustrating and confusing. Oh, the biggest one for me is the like, do the hardest thing first. That I know works for neurotypical people. I actually didn't believe it until I asked my husband. He's very neurotypical. And I said it through to him, and I described the whole thing. Where you wake up, you do the hardest thing first, and then that kind of wears you down a bit, and then you carry on with smaller things, and then that works for you, and that's all good, da-da-da. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm like, are you serious? That I know. And I tried to explain to him, like, no, I wake up with like varying levels of motivation. I don't like wake up here and then just slowly go down during the day. I wake up with varying. So sometimes I'll wake up and I'll need to do other stuff that I know is going to make me feel like, hey, yeah, you've achieved some good stuff, like you're on a good track today, to build up my motivation, and then do the big thing, and then it's down here, and then I work through a couple of other smaller things. Because I'm like, dude, if I'm here and I do the one big thing, I'm gonna be toast for the rest of the day. He was like, oh. So anyway, that's just one of those little random things, but having that label to understand why certain advice just isn't going to work for you. And again, you still need to try it and see, but to have some kind of understanding of maybe you're not doing it wrong, maybe it just really doesn't work for your brain, is actually so helpful. So anyway, I still have a lot to learn in this whole neurodivergent space, but it's really great in the sense that it feels like a lot of things are clicking for me that just never did before, and it was very demotivating and upsetting and isolating for a while, and kind of led me to a path where I almost felt somewhat kind of self-destructive. It felt a bit like no matter what I do, things still feel really terrible, so what's the point? And that's a really horrible place to get to. And that was a really good sign for me that I really did need to reevaluate. It wasn't just that I wasn't trying hard enough at working with my anxiety, it really was that there was something else going on that needed to be looked at. So I'm really grateful for all the support that I do have in my life. And I'm also really grateful for you guys, because I've gotten such amazing, lovely messages from a lot of the little things that I've worked out about my mental health along the way that I've shared with you, and I'm hoping that this is another one of those. So however it is that your brain works, take care of yourself. And if you are really noticing that things are harder than they should be, and you know that people around you think that you're a really awesome, hardworking person, but you really don't feel like it on the inside, maybe have a closer look at that, because you deserve to feel good about yourself. So anyway, take care guys, I will talk to you again soon. Please subscribe and like the video, and let me know your thoughts down below. I would love to hear from you. Okay, take care everyone. Bye.